You're at a butcher shop. There's a glass case in front of you, stacked with steaks, chops, ground beef, maybe a rack of ribs if the place is feeling fancy. All of it, muscle, all of it, from roughly the same 2 or 3 cuts of the same animal. You point at something, pay for it, take it home, cook it, eat it, and at no point during any of that do you stop and think about what you're missing, because inside every animal you've ever eaten, there were a dozen other parts: a liver, a heart, kidneys, a brain, a spleen, lungs, intestines, a thymus gland, a pancreas, a stomach lining, a set of eyeballs, all of it technically edible, all of it packed with nutrients, and almost none of it anywhere near your dinner plate. That's strange, if you think about it. We killed the whole animal. We paid for the whole animal. Somebody processed the whole animal and then we threw away most of it and ate the one part that is, nutritionally speaking, the least interesting thing in there. So why? Why do humans eat muscle and ignore almost everything else? And is that actually a modern problem? Or have we always been this picky? The answer involves poison, some genuinely disturbing chemistry, a few thousand years of cultural squeamishness, and one organ that can kill you from a single serving if you eat the wrong version of it. Let's start with the organ your ancestors would have eaten first, because it wasn't the one you'd guess. The liver. For most of human history, the liver was the prize, not the muscle. The liver, hunter-gatherer groups across every continent. And this is documented by anthropologists from the Arctic to equatorial Africa, consistently treated the liver of a freshly killed animal as the single most valuable part of the carcass. In many cultures, the liver was reserved for the hunter who made the kill. In others, it was given to the eldest or to pregnant women or to children. The muscle, the steak, the part we now treat as the entire point of killing an animal, was secondary. Sometimes it was dried and stored for later, sometimes it was given to the dogs. And nutritionally, this makes complete sense. A 100-gram serving of beef liver contains over 800% of your daily recommended intake of vitamin B12, over 700% of your vitamin A, massive amounts of folate, riboflavin, iron, and copper. It is, gram for gram, one of the most nutrient-dense foods that exists on Earth. Muscle meat, by comparison, is mostly protein and water with moderate levels of B vitamins and zinc. It's fine. It's not bad for you. It's just not even close to competing with what the liver delivers. And from an evolutionary perspective, this obsession with organs makes perfect sense. Think about what your ancestors were dealing with. You're a Homo erectus on the African savanna 1.5 million years ago. You've just spent hours tracking and killing something large. You and your group burned enormous amounts of energy doing it. You need to replenish micronutrients, fat, and calories as fast as possible, because you don't know when the next kill is coming. Maybe tomorrow, maybe next week, maybe longer. Every calorie matters, every vitamin matters, so you don't start with the leg, you start with the liver, because it gives you the most nutrition per bite. You eat the bone marrow because it's loaded with fat, you eat the kidneys, you eat the heart. The muscle, the part that is mostly water and protein, gets dealt with after the good stuff is gone. And if you can't finish all the muscle before it spoils, no big loss. The organs already gave you what you needed. Anthropologist Craig Stanford at USC documented this prioritization across modern hunter-gatherer groups still practicing traditional hunting. The Hadza of Tanzania consistently consumed the liver, heart, and kidneys of a kill at the site before transporting the remaining muscle back to camp. The same pattern appears in the ethnographic records of the San people of southern Africa, the Aboriginal Australians, and dozens of other groups spanning multiple continents. It's not a regional preference, it's a nutritional strategy refined over hundreds of thousands of years. And here's the thing nobody talks about. For 99% of human evolutionary history, organ meat wasn't a separate category from real meat. It was the real meat. The distinction between organs and muscle is entirely modern. Your ancestors would not have understood the concept of throwing away the liver and keeping the steak. That would have been like throwing away the yolk and eating the shell. So how did we get from a world where the liver was the first thing eaten to a world where most people in developed countries have never eaten liver in their life and would gag at the suggestion? The answer to that is surprisingly recent, and it has almost nothing to do with biology. But before we get there, we need to talk about the organ that actually earned its reputation as dangerous. Because not all organs are safe, and the reasons some of them can hurt you are genuinely fascinating. Let's start with the one that kills. The liver is nutritious in most animals, but the liver of certain species is lethally toxic. And the reason comes down to a single vitamin stored at concentrations your body was never designed to handle vitamin A. Your body needs vitamin A. It's essential for vision, immune function, and cell growth. But unlike vitamin C, which your body flushes out when you've had too much, vitamin A is fat-soluble. It gets stored in your liver. And when you eat the liver of an animal that has itself been accumulating enormous quantities of vitamin A for its entire life, you can overdose on a single meal. This is called hypervitaminosis A. And it's not theoretical. In 1913, Antarctic explorers Douglas Mawson and Xavier Mertz were stranded on the ice during the Australasian Antarctic expedition. Their sled dogs died, and in desperation, they ate the dogs, including the livers. Mertz developed violent symptoms. His skin began peeling off in sheets. He became confused, then delirious, then comatose. He died within weeks. Mawson survived, barely with his skin sloughing off his body and his hair falling out. For decades, the exact cause was debated. It was eventually attributed to hypervitaminosis A from the husky liver. Arctic indigenous communities had known about this for centuries before Mawson's expedition. Inuit and Yupik hunters had specific, well-established taboos against eating the liver of polar bears, seals, and sled dogs. Not because someone told them the vitamin A content was dangerously high, because enough people had gotten sick and died over enough generations that the knowledge became woven into cultural law. Don't eat the liver. Not that one. Never that one. And that's the first piece of the puzzle. Some organs in some animals are genuinely dangerous, and the danger isn't always obvious from looking at them. A polar bear liver looks like any other liver. It smells like any other liver. It will kill you just as dead as eating a poisonous plant. Except nobody warned you because the warning disappeared along with the traditional knowledge of the people who figured it out the hard way. Now let's talk about an organ that gets a bad reputation it mostly doesn't deserve. Kidneys. If you ask someone why they don't eat kidneys, the most common answer you'll get is some version of "that's the filter." The kidney filters waste out of the blood, so eating a kidney means eating a filter full of waste. Sounds logical, sounds disgusting, and it's almost entirely wrong. The kidney doesn't store waste, it processes waste and sends it to the bladder as urine. The kidney itself, the actual organ tissue, does not accumulate the toxins it filters any more than a coffee filter retains the coffee after you pour it. The kidney is in reality a perfectly clean organ made of specialized tissue that is high in B12, selenium, and riboflavin. A single serving of beef kidney delivers more selenium than almost any other food you can name. Selenium is an antioxidant your thyroid needs to function. Most people in Western countries are mildly deficient in it. But the filter logic is so intuitively satisfying that it overrides the actual biochemistry every time. People hear filter, picture something dirty, and move on. The kidney never gets a second hearing, which is exactly what happens when disgust makes the decision before reason gets a chance to speak. The same faulty logic gets applied to the liver, ironically. The liver detoxifies the blood, so it must be full of toxins. It isn't. The liver processes toxins and either neutralizes them or routes them out through bile and urine. The organ itself stores nutrients, not poisons. That's literally its job. Storing vitamins A, B12, iron, and copper for later use. Calling liver dirty because it processes toxins is like calling a water treatment plant dirty because water passes through it. But try explaining that at a dinner party. Good luck. Now here's where this connects back to why you don't eat organs in general. Because the fear of the dangerous ones combined with folk myths about the dirty ones got applied to all of them over time. Once a culture starts treating some organs as risky, the aversion creeps outward. The brain becomes suspicious, the kidneys become unpleasant, the heart becomes weird, and eventually the entire category of organ meat gets pushed to the margins, not because any specific organ was proven dangerous, but because the disgust response doesn't do nuance, it does categories. And once organ meat became a category your culture associated with poverty, risk, or foreignness, the nutritional argument stopped mattering entirely. Let's talk about brains, because that's where the conversation usually gets uncomfortable, and for good reason. For most of human history, brains were eaten regularly. Roman cookbooks include recipes for calf brains, fried in olive oil. French cuisine has cervelle de veau, brain in butter sauce. In parts of the Middle East and South Asia, goat brain curry is still a common dish. The brain is high in omega-3 fatty acids, particularly DHA, which is ironic because DHA is the same compound your own brain needs to function properly. Eating brains is, in a weird and circular way, feeding your brain to your brain. But in the late 20th century, brain consumption collapsed in most Western countries. And the reason has a name: bovine spongiform encephalopathy, BSE, mad cow disease. In the 1980s and 1990s, a wave of BSE swept through British cattle herds. The disease was caused by prions, misfolded proteins that are, from a biological perspective, one of the most terrifying things in nature. Prions are not alive. They're not bacteria. They're not viruses. They're not parasites. They are simply proteins folded into the wrong shape, and when they come into contact with normally folded proteins, they convert them, like a template. One by one, protein by protein, the misfolded version spreads through neural tissue until the brain is riddled with microscopic holes and stops functioning. You cannot cook a prion out of meat. You cannot freeze it out. You cannot bleach it away in any practical sense. Standard sterilization procedures that destroy every known pathogen on Earth do not reliably destroy prions. They survive temperatures above 600 degrees Celsius, They survived chemical treatments that would dissolve steel. When humans consumed BSE-infected beef products, particularly brain and spinal tissue, some of them developed variant Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, VCJD, a human prion disease. It is universally fatal. There is no treatment. Between 1995 and 2017, 178 people in the United Kingdom died from VCJD. Now, 178 deaths in 22 years is statistically small compared to almost any other food safety risk. More people die from salmonella annually. But the nature of the disease, the absolute impossibility of treatment, the slow onset, the knowledge that you ate something 10 years ago that is now dismantling your brain cell by cell, that kind of risk doesn't follow normal risk mathematics. It follows fear mathematics. And fear mathematics said brains are off the menu permanently for entire generations of Western consumers. And BSE isn't even the first time this happened. In the 1950s, researchers studying the 4 people of Papua New Guinea encountered a mysterious disease called kuru. Victims developed uncontrollable tremors, lost the ability to walk, and died within months. At its peak, kuru was killing up to 2% of the 4 population per year. It was overwhelmingly concentrated in women and children. The cause turned out to be endocannibalism, the ritualistic consumption of deceased relatives as part of funeral rites. The 4 ate the brains and organs of their dead as a way of honoring them, of keeping their essence within the community. Women and children received the brain and internal organs. Men received the muscle. And it was the brain tissue carrying prions from previous kuru victims that spread the disease through each generation. When the Australian colonial government banned the practice in the late 1950s, kuru began a slow decline. But because of prion disease's extraordinarily long incubation period, some cases continued appearing for decades. The last known kuru death was recorded in 2009, over 50 years after the practice that caused it had stopped. Think about what that timeline means for an organ you ate. A single exposure to a contaminated brain in 1957 could kill you in 2009. That is not a disease timeline that any normal food safety framework is built to handle. And honestly, from a pure food safety perspective, the modern avoidance of brain and nervous tissue is not irrational. The prion risk specifically concentrates in neural tissue and organs associated with the nervous system, the brain, the spinal cord, and certain parts of the intestine. Muscle meat carries negligible prion risk. So the instinct to avoid organs and eat muscle, which might seem squeamish, actually aligns perfectly with the one pathogen that our standard cooking temperatures cannot destroy. Now let's talk about the organs that are completely safe and that you're still not eating: the heart. A beef heart is pure muscle. It is structurally no different from the steak in your fridge. It's just a muscle that happened to be responsible for pumping blood instead of moving a leg. Nutritionally, heart is rich in CoQ10, an enzyme your own heart cells need to produce energy. It's high in B vitamins, zinc, and iron. It's lean, it's cheap, and it tastes, according to virtually everyone who's tried it, like a slightly richer, slightly more minerally version of regular beef. Nobody eats it, not in any significant volume in North America or Western Europe. The reason has nothing to do with safety and everything to do with what happens in your head when someone says the word heart in the context of food. You picture the organ, you picture it beating, you picture blood, and that image overrides every rational assessment of taste and nutrition that could follow. The psychologist Paul Rozin, who spent decades at the University of Pennsylvania studying the psychology of disgust, identified this as a core feature of how food rejection works. Disgust is not primarily a safety mechanism. It's an identity mechanism. You don't avoid organs because you've calculated the risk. You avoid them because eating organs doesn't fit the picture you have of yourself as a person. It feels low status, it feels old-fashioned, it feels like something people did when they had to, not when they had a choice, and that is almost entirely a product of industrialization. Before the 20th century, organ meats were standard fare across virtually every culture on Earth. Haggis in Scotland, anticuchos in Peru, kokoretsi in Greece, liver pate in France, tripe soup across the entire Ottoman Empire, kidney pie in England. These were not fringe foods. These were normal. The idea that you would kill an animal and throw away 40% of it would have been absurd to anyone living before roughly 1950. What changed was the meatpacking industry. When livestock processing moved from local butchers to massive industrial facilities, the economic calculus shifted. Muscle meat was easy to standardize, package, and brand. It looked clean, it looked uniform, it photographed well. Organs were irregular, perishable, difficult to process at scale, and hard to make look appealing under fluorescent lights. The industry didn't stop producing organ meat entirely, it just stopped marketing it to consumers who could afford alternatives. Organs became animal feed, pet food, exported to countries where people still ate them. In the United States, by the 1970s, organ consumption had dropped to a fraction of what it had been 2 generations earlier. The economic incentives aligned with the existing disgust response, and together they pushed organ meat almost entirely off the Western plate. Religious and cultural codes added another layer. Kosher dietary law permits organ meat, but the preparation requirements are extensive. Organs must be thoroughly salted and drained of blood before consumption, a process called kashering that is more labor-intensive for organs than for muscle cuts. Islamic halal guidelines, similarly, permit organ consumption but require specific slaughter methods and blood drainage. In practice, the additional preparation effort meant that as industrial food processing made muscle meat increasingly convenient, organs fell out of regular rotation even in communities where they were technically permitted. In Hindu dietary tradition, a significant portion of the population is vegetarian entirely, removing the question altogether. But among Hindu communities that do eat meat, organ consumption carries its own set of associations, often linked to lower social castes or specific regional cuisines rather than mainstream practice. Buddhist traditions in East Asia follow similar patterns, where meat eating itself is already constrained, and organs sit further down the hierarchy of acceptable foods. The result is a convergence. Biology made a few specific organs genuinely dangerous. Folk wisdom, sometimes accurate and sometimes not, extended that caution to organs in general. Religious frameworks added preparation barriers that made organs less convenient. Industrial economics made muscle meat cheap and uniform. And psychological disgust operating below the level of rational thought sealed the deal, 5 completely independent forces, all pushing in the same direction. Away from the organ, toward the steak. And here's the part that should bother you. While developed nations were moving away from organ consumption, the nutritional science was moving in exactly the opposite direction. In 2007, researchers at Purdue University published a study examining the nutrient density of various animal foods per calorie. Liver, kidney, and heart scored higher than any cut of muscle meat on almost every micronutrient measured. A separate analysis by Matt Lalonde, a biochemist at Harvard, ranked beef liver as the single most nutrient-dense commonly available food, ahead of kale, spinach, salmon, and every other food that gets celebrated in health magazines. The organ your great-grandmother ate without thinking about it is nutritionally superior to the supplement aisle you walk past every week at the pharmacy. That is a genuinely strange place for a civilization to end up. Now, not every organ deserves rehabilitation. Lungs, for instance, are banned from human consumption in the United States under federal meat inspection regulations. The USDA prohibits the sale of animal lungs for human food, partly because lungs are difficult to inspect for contamination, and partly because their spongy texture tends to trap bacteria, stomach contents, and other material during slaughter. The UK does not have this ban, which is why haggis made in Scotland traditionally contains sheep lung and haggis made for export to the United States does not. Intestines are eaten widely across Asia, Latin America, and parts of Europe, but require extensive cleaning and preparation. Chitlins or chitterlings made from pig intestines remain part of the culinary tradition in the American South, though consumption has declined with each generation. Tripe. The stomach lining of cattle is standard in pho, in menudo, in dozens of soups across the world. It just stopped being standard in the countries that decided they could afford to be picky. The spleen, the pancreas, the thymus. Each of these has a culinary history somewhere. Sweetbreads, which are the thymus gland of a calf or lamb, are still considered a delicacy in French and Argentine cuisine. The pancreas contains digestive enzymes that, when cooked correctly, break down into something tender and rich. The spleen gets stuffed into sandwiches in Palermo and served to tourists who don't ask what it is until after they've already decided it's delicious. The pattern is the same every time. The organ is safe, the organ is nutritious, the organ has been eaten by humans for thousands of years. The only thing that changed is the story we tell ourselves about what kind of person eats it. And that brings us to the genuinely weird part of this whole story. The part where modern health culture rediscovered organs and turned them into capsules. Walk into any health food store today and you'll find bottles of desiccated beef liver pills, desiccated heart, desiccated kidney, freeze-dried, powdered, packed into gelatin capsules and sold for $40 a bottle. The same organ your butcher will sell you for $3 a pound, dehydrated and marked up by a factor of 10, so that people who can't stomach the idea of eating liver can get the nutrients without ever having to confront the fact that they're eating an organ. That is, on some level, the most perfectly modern solution to a problem that doesn't actually exist. We identified the most nutrient-dense food available to us. We decided we found it disgusting. And then we spent real money turning it into a pill so we could consume it without the experience of actually eating it. No other culture in human history has done this. Not because they weren't capable of it, but because the idea would have been genuinely confusing to them. You have the liver right there. Why would you grind it up and put it in a capsule? Just eat it. But we can't, or we think we can't. And the gap between those two things is the entire story. So here's where we actually are. Every animal you've ever eaten had a complete set of organs. Organs that carried nutrients your muscles don't, in concentrations your diet probably lacks. Your ancestors ate them without hesitation. Billions of people in dozens of countries still eat them today. The organs that are genuinely dangerous, the ones that concentrate toxins or carry prion risk, are a small and specific subset that traditional cultures identified and avoided long before modern science explained why. The rest of them are sitting in your supermarket right now, priced lower than the muscle cuts you'll buy instead, waiting for someone to remember that food used to be the whole animal, not just the parts that look good on Instagram. Your great-grandmother would not understand the question. She would not understand why you eat the leg and throw away the liver. She would not understand the supplement aisle. She would look at the organ sitting untouched in the butcher's case and the $40 bottle of capsules on the shelf behind you and wonder genuinely what went wrong. Maybe nothing went wrong. Maybe this is just what happens when a species gets rich enough to be choosy and squeamish enough to forget where its food comes from. But the organs are still there. They've been there the entire time. And your body still knows what to do with them, even if your brain decided it would rather not.